Open most English Bibles to the one verse everyone is quoting when they say the word rapture. And here is the strange thing. The word rapture is not in it. What the verse actually says is caught up. A handful of expanded translations, like the Amplified Bible, add raptured in parentheses as an explanatory gloss. But the word that so many people have built an entire map of the future on top of is simply not the word the text in front of them uses, and it has become one of modern Christianity's most contested end-time subjects, carried deep into pop culture by best-selling novels and films. So here is the honest question, the one almost nobody stops to walk all the way through, and the one this whole episode is going to answer slowly and fairly. If rapture is not the word in the verse, then where did it come from? Who put it there, and when? And the bigger question underneath it is the famous picture. Believers suddenly removed from the earth before a 7-year tribulation, actually stated in the text, or is it a framework that got built on top of the text much later? I want to be clear before we start. This is not an episode about telling you what to believe about the end of the world. Sincere, careful people land in very different places on that, and they will keep doing so long after this video. This is about something more useful and more honest, learning to separate the word from the verse, and the verse from the timeline somebody wrapped around it. Once you can tell those three things apart, you can listen to the loudest argument in the room without being pushed around by it. Start with the word, because the word has a passport, and the stamps in it are dated. The English word rapture is not English in origin, and it is not Greek. It is Latin, and it arrived late. Go back to what Paul actually wrote. In Greek, in the verse everyone means. The phrase your Bible renders caught up is the Greek verb harpazo. It is a hard, physical word. It means to seize, to snatch, to grab and carry off, often suddenly and often by force. It is the word you would use for a bird of prey taking something in its talons, or for a thief snatching a purse. There is nothing gentle or floating about it in Greek. Now watch what happens to that verb as it travels. In the late 4th and early 5th century, as the Latin Bible tradition took shape in the West, that Greek verb harpazo gets rendered into Latin as rapiemur. We shall be caught up, from the Latin verb rapio, which carries the same violent snatching sense. And here I want to be careful with a detail you will often hear told wrong. It is common to credit that Latin translation of Paul's letters to Jerome personally, but the reviser of the Pauline epistles in that tradition is actually anonymous, and honest scholars will tell you we should not simply pin it on Jerome. The point survives either way. From that Latin verb rapio, through the medieval Latin noun raptura and the Latin noun raptus, the word slides across centuries and finally surfaces in English as rapture. So follow the chain the whole way. A violent Greek snatching verb, translated into a violent Latin verb, frozen into a Latin noun, and then lifted, many centuries after Paul, into an English word that most people now imagine as something serene and soft. The word everyone fights about is not a word Paul wrote. It is a later Latin coat of paint, and the paint has a date on it. That does not make the event unreal. Paul plainly describes something happening. It only means the label came a long time after the thing it labels. Now go to the verse itself, slowly, and start where it actually starts, which is not with a theory about the future, but with a room full of grief. Paul is writing to a young church in the port city of Thessalonica, and they have a specific human problem. Some of their people have died, and the believers who are left are grieving and uncertain about the ones who have died, worried that those who died before the Lord returned might somehow be at a disadvantage, might miss the reunion. So Paul writes to comfort them, and he says it plainly, I do not want you to grieve like people who have no hope. That is the occasion of the most famous end times verse in the world, not a prophecy chart. A pastor answering frightened mourners about whether their dead are all right. Hold on to that, because the famous systems built on this passage often skip right past it, and it changes the temperature of every word that follows. Here is what he tells them. First Thessalonians 4:16 and 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Read it as the comfort it was written to be. And notice the order of it, because the order is the reassurance. The dead rise first. That is the whole point. To a grieving church, your dead are not last, they are first. The living are gathered second, together with them, which is the word that was doing the healing. Together. Nobody misses the reunion. And notice one more thing about the scene on the page, because most people picture the opposite of what is written. We tend to imagine the rapture as silent, a quiet vanishing, people gone in a blink and empty clothes left behind. But the verse is not quiet at all. There is a shout. There is the voice of an archangel. There is the trumpet of God. Whatever else this is, the text does not present it as a secret. Now, in fairness, the verse does not say who hears all that noise, and it does not settle every argument that later grew up around it. I am not going to pretend one adjective decides a debate this old. But if you are going to build a picture from the words on the page, loud is closer to the text than silent. There is one Greek word buried in that verse that most English readers walk straight past, and it is the word that has quietly fed the whole debate. It is the phrase, to meet the Lord. The Greek noun there is a panthesis. Ordinarily, in plain Greek, it just means a meeting, nothing dramatic. But some scholars point out that in the ancient world, this particular word had a specific civic use. When an emperor or a visiting dignitary approached a city, the citizens would not sit inside and wait for him to arrive. They would throw the gates open and stream out along the road to meet him while he was still coming, form up around him as an honor escort, and then turn and accompany him back through their own gates into the city. The meeting happened outside. The destination was inside. And on the strength of that custom, some readers argue that in First Thessalonians, the believers who rise go out to meet a descending Lord in the air and then return with him to the earth. That the direction of the whole scene is a welcome party, not a departure. It is a genuinely interesting reading. But here I have to be honest with you again, because this is exactly the kind of place where a confident narrator will overreach. Other careful scholars push back and say a panthesis is not a technical term, that it is used plenty of times where no grand escort is implied, and that the word by itself simply cannot tell you what happens after the meeting. So this is a real and open scholarly disagreement, and you should hold it as one. Luke, for instance, uses the very same noun in Acts 28, verse 15, when the Roman Christians travel out along the road to meet Paul as he comes toward the city, and the very next verse just reports that Paul arrived in Rome. The word is worth knowing about. Millions of people arguing about the rapture have never once heard it, but it is a contested inference, not a settled proof, and anyone who hands it to you as a knockout blow is selling you more certainty than the evidence holds. Before we leave the word, follow that snatching verb, harpazo, into the other places it shows up, because they are worth seeing and they cut in an interesting direction. In Acts chapter 8, Philip has just baptized an Ethiopian official on a desert road. The man comes up out of the water, and the text says, "The Spirit of the Lord caught Philip away, Harpazo, and the official never sees him again, and Philip turns up suddenly in another town down the coast." In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes a mystical experience so overwhelming he can barely narrate it. He was caught up, Harpazo, to the third heaven, and he says he genuinely does not know whether he was in the body or out of it. In Revelation 12, a newborn child is caught up, Harpazo, to God and to his throne, snatched to safety from awaiting danger. And then the gentlest use of all. In John chapter 10, Jesus says of his followers that no one will snatch them out of his hand. The same violent verb turned completely around into a promise of security, a hand closing over a lamb so that nothing can tear it away. So harpazo is real and used more than once. It denotes seizing, snatching, carrying off with force or suddenness prominent in many of its uses, while the direction and the purpose come from the context around it. In First Thessalonians, the clouds and the air are what supply the upward direction. The verb itself just supplies the snatch. But here is the thing to notice across every single one of those passages. Not one of them comes with a timetable. The verb tells you the manner of the thing: sudden, seized, carried. It never once tells you the year, the sequence, or where in any larger schedule it sits. Keep that in your pocket, because it is about to matter a great deal. There is a second verse people quote for the rapture almost as often, and it carries an ambiguity most readers never notice. In Matthew 24, Jesus says that at his coming, 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill. One will be taken and the other left. That line has launched 1,000 bumper stickers, and everyone assumes they know which person they want to be. The one who is taken, snatched away to safety, while the poor soul left behind is stuck for the tribulation. But go back 3 verses and read what Jesus compares it to, because he tells you the frame himself. As it was in the days of Noah, he says, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Sit with that. In the flood picture Jesus just drew, the people who are taken away are the ones swept off in the judgment, and the one who is left is Noah, safe in the ark. So which is the fortunate one in the very next line, the one taken or the one left? Read it as a rapture, and taken is the rescue. Read it against the Noah frame Jesus himself supplied, and taken can look like the opposite. And some careful readers argue it is neither, that the point is only that 2 people side by side are separated, without saying which one is better off. This is a real and live debate among interpreters, and I'm not going to hand you the answer as if it were obvious, because the text genuinely holds all of those pulls at once. But that is the whole lesson of this episode in a single verse. The picture you were handed and the picture on the page are not always facing the same direction, and the only way to know is to slow down and read what the writer put right next to it. Let me pause here for a second. If this is untangling something you'd only ever heard shouted about, hitting subscribe is the one small thing that helps, because it is how this finds people who have said the word rapture their whole lives and were never told where it actually came from. Okay? Now, to the picture everyone is really fighting over and the century it was born in. So if the word is a Latin coat of paint, where does the famous picture come from? The believers suddenly removed from earth, kept separate from a final return before a 7-year tribulation begins. Here the history stops being ancient and gets specific and recent, and this is the part almost nobody is told. The modern framework, a distinct removal of the church, held apart from Christ's final public return, slotted before a 7-year period of tribulation, was principally systematized and promoted by an Anglo-Irish preacher named John Nelson Darby. Darby was a former clergyman who left the established church and became a leading figure among a movement called the Plymouth Brethren, and it was across the late 1820s and into the early 1830s that his distinctive system of reading prophecy took shape. He was tireless. He traveled. He taught. He wrote constantly, and he carried this way of dividing up biblical history, dispensations, it came to be called, on repeated tours across the Atlantic to America, where it found deep and lasting soil. But one of the things that carried it furthest was a book. In 1909, a man named Cyrus Scofield published a study Bible, the Scofield Reference Bible, revised in 1917, and he did something quietly powerful with it. He printed his own interpretive notes, shaped by this dispensational framework, on the same pages as the King James text itself. Footnotes sitting directly beneath the scripture. For millions of readers over the next century, the notes and the text sat so close together that the framework simply felt like part of the Bible. It became one of the main vehicles by which this whole picture spread through the English-speaking world. Now, I want to say the fair thing clearly, because the temptation here is to overplay the hand. The fact that a framework is recent does not, by itself, make it wrong. Plenty of true things get stated clearly only late. A late birthday is not a lie. There are a few earlier lines in church history that some point to as possible hints of a similar idea, and honest scholars genuinely debate how much weight those bear. So this is not a gotcha. But it does mean something concrete and worth holding when someone tells you the Bible plainly and obviously teaches a 7-year timeline, with the church removed first. The honest reply is that the most detailed, systematic version of that picture is roughly 2 centuries old, that it was built by named people you can look up, and that it is a framework laid on top of the verses, not a sentence lifted out of them. And here is the piece that reframes the entire fight, and it is smaller and stranger than the argument around it. The number 7 years, the length of the tribulation that the whole timeline hangs on, is never actually stated as such anywhere in the New Testament. There is no verse that says the tribulation lasts 7 years. The number is not quoted, it is constructed. Here is how the construction works, and it is worth seeing so you can judge it for yourself. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, there is a famous prophecy of 70 weeks, and interpreters have long read those weeks as 7s of years. The final week of that prophecy, Daniel 9:27, is then taken as a 7-year span, and its 2 halves are correlated with the time periods that repeat in the book of Revelation, the 42 months, the 1260 days, the time, times, and half a time, each of which works out to roughly 3.5 years. Read Daniel's final 7 as 7 years and line it up with those 3.5-year terms in Revelation, and you arrive at 7. That is where the 7-year figure comes from, though it is worth saying that Revelation itself never labels a single unified 7-year tribulation. The number is assembled, not quoted. Now, that is a real construction, drawn from real texts, and I am not here to tell you it is illegitimate. But you should see it for exactly what it is, an interpretation that stitches a number in Daniel to numbers in Revelation, across a gap of centuries and genres. It is a reading. Other serious readings of those same texts exist, and thoughtful people hold them. The 7 years is not a floor you can stand on. It is a bridge someone built, and there is more than one way across the river. So the real landscape is not the truth versus the deniers, which is how it usually gets shouted. The real landscape is a set of serious competing maps drawn over the same ground by people who take the text seriously. There is the pre-tribulation view, that the church is removed before the tribulation begins. There is the mid-tribulation view, that it happens partway through. There is the pre-wrath view, later still. There is the post-tribulation view, that believers are gathered at the very end, after the tribulation, in a single public return. And running underneath all of them are much older traditions, held for most of church history, that simply see one public return of Christ at the end and do not slice it into a separate, earlier removal at all. Several of the named systems in that list are themselves modern. the labels are recent, even where the instinct is old. And all of them are trying to do the same honest thing. Relate this one comforting passage in First Thessalonians to other passages elsewhere, in 1 Corinthians 15, in Matthew 24, in 2 Thessalonians, in Revelation, and assemble them into a single sequence. The disagreements are real, and they are not stupid, and I am not going to pretend from behind a narrator's voice that I have privately settled a 2,000-year conversation for you. So put the 3 layers back together, because that is the whole point, and it is more freeing than any single side in the argument. The passage you can hold in your hand does give you a sequence, and it is a real one. A descent, a shout, an archangel's voice, a trumpet, the dead in Christ rising first, the living gathered together with them, a meeting in the clouds, and, in Paul's own last words of the passage, being with the Lord and staying with him. That is genuinely in the text, and it is specific. What the text does not give you is the rest of the scaffolding. It does not give you a 7-year interval. It does not tell you whether this meeting sits before, during, or after a tribulation. It does not hand you a chart. Those things all come from relating this passage to others and drawing a line between them, which is a legitimate thing to do, and also a human thing to do, done by named people at dateable times, and done more than one way. The verse on the page is smaller, quieter, and warmer than the vast machinery that has been bolted on top of it. And once you can see the machinery as machinery, you start mistaking the map for the ground. Here is what is worth carrying out of this, and I will say it carefully, because this is the exact spot where people shove each other around the hardest. The word at the center of the verse, apanthesis, means meeting. Some readers hear a welcoming delegation and an earthward return inside that word. Others caution, fairly, that the word just means meeting and refuses to tell you what comes next. That argument is not going to be settled by this video, and it should not be. But look at what is not in dispute, because it is the thing Paul actually leaned his whole weight on. He did not write this passage to win a timing debate. He wrote it to comfort grieving people, and the center of gravity of every line is the reunion itself. The dead raised, the living gathered, believers brought together, and, in his words, so we will always be with the Lord. Whatever map you end up trusting, and careful, sincere readers end up in genuinely different places, the middle of the scene is not a mechanism. It is a meeting. It is the answer to a frightened church's question about whether their dead were all right, and the answer was, they are first. You are together, and nobody is left out. So do the honest thing with a subject this loaded, the thing almost nobody in the shouting match does. Separate the 3 layers and hold each one for exactly what it is. The word is Latin, a coat of paint brushed centuries later onto one violent Greek verb. The verse is real and specific and older and kinder than the fight around it. A descent, a trumpet, clouds, air, a meeting and lasting presence with the Lord. And the timeline is a framework, one of several, whose most detailed form is about 200 years old and has named authors. Keep those 3 straight and you can walk into the loudest room on the internet and read the whole debate without being pushed around by whoever happens to be the most certain. If this untangled something you'd only ever heard yelled about, say so in the comments, even in a single line, and forward it to somebody who has been told there is just one honest way to read it, because rapture is not the word in most Bibles. What First Thessalonians actually gives you is a descent, a trumpet, clouds, the air, a meeting with the Lord, and enduring presence with Him, written to comfort a church grieving its own dead. The questions of timing and destination are answered by correlating this passage with others, and ancient and modern frameworks answer them differently. The real task it leaves you is learning to tell the map from the ground it was drawn on,